Today is March 11th, 2021. My name is Joe Todd. This is an interview with James Stromberg in Oshaleta, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
I was born in Stillwater, Oklahoma.
And when's your birthday?
December 10th, 1947.
1947. Who was your father?
My father was Harold Leroy, L-E-R-O-Y, Stromberg.
Okay. And your mother?
My mother was Frances Theo Stromberg. Her maiden name was Ireland.
Did you go through school in Stillwater?
I went to first and second grade in Stillwater, and then my mother took a job with the University of Arizona. In 1956 we moved to Tucson, and I went to the third through fifth grade in Tucson.
Well, what kind of work did your mother do?
She was a college professor.
Okay.
Originally she taught at Oklahoma A&M College, and in 1956 that was still Oklahoma A&M, and she took a job with the University of Arizona in Tucson at that time.
Okay. Well, what did she teach?
She taught, her education and her degrees were in family relations and child development.
Okay.
And, or I may have said that incorrectly. I believe her degrees were child development. She taught in the Department of Family Relations and Child Development.
Okay.
That at the time was referred to as FRCD. And it no longer carries that name. I've forgotten what it's called now, but for many decades that's what it was.
So, yeah, in Tucson you went through what grades in Tucson?
Well, I went through the third, fourth, and fifth, seventh, eighth, 10th, 11th, and I only spent a half a year in the 12th because I just had the credits I needed to graduate. So I did that there. There were two missing years, and that was the ninth grade and the sixth grade, and I spent those in Tallahassee, Florida. My mother had received a Danforth scholarship to complete her PhD, and she did that at Florida State University in Tallahassee, and it took between the sixth and ninth grade. She actually went to school there full time when I was in the sixth grade, and then she worked on her dissertation and completed it and came back, did most of that work when I was in the ninth grade.
Okay.
So I was there for 2 years.
Okay. In your schooling, who was your favorite teacher?
There's one obvious answer to that, and it's an interesting story in itself. But he was Dr. Rutledge at Oklahoma State University. He taught physics. He was a retired Navy captain, and I was just out of the Navy, and I didn't want to go take physics from a Navy captain. Then I went into him and said, I got this down, I can read this book and do this class on my own, I'll just come in for the test. And he said, I don't know very many people who could take physics that way, and I don't know that you could. And that can be done here at Oklahoma State University, but it requires my permission, and I can't give that to you. So I had to go take his class. And I was awful glad that I did later. He was a PhD professor in physics, but he was the best teacher that I ever had in all my schooling. Mm-hmm. And I based every problem I solved in engineering later in my career on how Dr. Rutledge taught me to solve problems. Yeah. He was my favorite.
Yeah. Where were you when Kennedy was assassinated?
I was doing afternoon sessions I was a sophomore in high school. I was in our home in Tucson, 3/4 of a mile from the high school. That assassination happened in the morning, and we had the TV on and heard about it. And I didn't go to school till noon that day because I had afternoon sessions. And I remember seeing it on the news, and I remember going to school, and I remember my sophomore English teacher crying that day over that our president had been assassinated. So I remember the day where I was. I was in our home watching television and went to school a few hours later.
Do you remember the Gulf of Tonkin incident?
Vaguely, where some destroyers reported some fire, and it was what gave our military permission to raise the stakes on military operations in Vietnam. And I think it was the Samuel Moore DD 748 involved in that incident. That wasn't the primary ship. The primary ship was maybe the Maddox. Anyway, I remember it.
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't know that it paved the way for me to go there, but I remember the incident.
Okay. When did you join the Navy?
In late February or early March of 1966 was when I signed my name with the recruiter. April the 12th was my first day. And I really can't remember if April the 12th I'd actually gotten to San Diego to boot camp or but when I joined the Navy, it started with the bus station in downtown Tucson, and I headed to an induction center in Phoenix, 100 miles away, and and that may have actually been April the 12th. I'm not sure when the day started, but.
Okay. Why did you join the Navy or the Army, Marines, or the Air Force?
Well, in 1966, I finished high school mid-year in December of '65, and I'd always known through grade school and whatnot I wanted to be an engineer. So the next step was engineering, and I started engineering there at the University of Arizona and found out I just wasn't mature enough to be responsible enough to learn engineering at that time. I went through high school without ever doing a homework assignment. I just went to class, didn't care about school, didn't do much of anything. And when I got to engineering school, I realized I can't do this that way. I was going to have to do homework and study and learn, and I'd never done any of that before, and that was a new thing for me, and I just wasn't ready for it yet. So I knew that as soon as I quit going to school there, it was only going to be a matter of weeks before the draft board found out about it. And so I had a choice of being drafted or joining and having an opportunity to maybe join the Navy instead of just going and being drafted into the Army or Marines. And so that's what I did, because I thought that might give me an opportunity to learn more than I would have if I'd waited to be drafted.
Where'd you go for boot camp?
To San Diego.
Tell me about boot camp.
Can we take just a break here?
Sure.
Joe? I've got to pee again.
Okay.
Well, I guess the first thing I think about boot camp is that without my knowledge, at the same time I went down and joined the Navy, a good friend of mine that I went to high school with had done the same thing, and we found out we'd done it at the same time, and we were scheduled for boot camp to leave Tucson at the same time. And I was given a bus ticket to head to the induction center in Phoenix and then on to boot camp. And I let my mom know the next day that the prior day, that the next day when she took me down to drop me off at the bus station, that she needed to just drop me off. I didn't want a mother or grandmother down there saying goodbye. I was 18 and thought I'd grown up and didn't want mommy down at the bus station bidding me goodbye. So I told her she was just going to have to drop me off. Well, I missed her so much before boot camp was over that I was sorry I did that. But that's how it started. And the friend's name was Richard Mans. And turns out we got assigned to the same boot camp company, so we went through boot camp together. And Navy boot camp was a little bit different probably than Army or Marines. It wasn't very physical. It was more of a matter of going to classes. And every day we had several classes lined up that we had to go sit and listen to these classes. Sometimes we had to take tests to make sure that we learned what we were supposed to. So it wasn't some of the stuff we saw on TV of, we did have a drill sergeant, but, and there was a little bit of that kind of stuff. We had to stand in formation, and every class we went to, the whole company marched, and we marched by commands, you know, left turn, and etc. So we did all that practicing for marching and whatnot as we went to each of these classes, and then we would be turned loose from the formation of the company, and we walk into class and do the class. And it was a lot to put up with, just because there were a whole lot of things they told you to do and you had to do it, and you had people that were doing their best to intimidate you, to tell you if you didn't do any of those things, well, you might get washed up and sent home. And the one thing I remember that they didn't harp on too much at boot camp there, but we had all heard, and it was a sign of the times, and that was that we were expected to do our military service. And if you washed up in boot camp, you may be given some kind of discharge that was less than honorable. And most of us were under the impression if we didn't leave that military service an honorable discharge, it may be, we may never be anybody the rest of our lives. We might not be able to get a good job. It turns out that I was never even asked about the military when I finally got a job. And a lot of that was probably not as true as, maybe it used to be true, but it didn't turn out to be true for me. But we all believed it at the time, and we did our best to make it through boot camp, because it was our first step of adulthood, and if we'd have failed at that one, we were led to believe anyway, we'd probably be a failure for the rest of our lives.
What type of training did you have in boot camp?
The biggest official training that we did was we were all trained to be firemen. And there's pictures of us in this fire training in this boot camp manual, and as a matter of fact, I understood later, my brother ended up being the fire chief there in Stillwater, and he told us that one of the things that they looked for people to hire were ex-Navy people, because they all had at least a good basic fire training. And that was one of the things that we did. And it's been quite a while. But let me flip through that book. I bet I can tell you what some of them were. But one of the things that we had was, we had a book that was about this thick, and it was called the Blue Jackets Manual. And that Blue Jackets Manual told us everything we needed to know in the Navy. And it told us how to fold each and every article of clothing. There was an official way to fold a t-shirt, and each piece of your uniform, and you had to learn how to fold each and one of those pieces. And the creases had to be perfect, and they had to be in your sea locker, and you had to stand inspections possibly every day for every one of those articles in your sea locker. And seemed like a bunch of BS to us, but I guess one of the things that they were finding out was could we take instructions and learn how to do anything, even if it was just BS. We needed to be able to do that. So that was one of the things they were evaluating. And
What about your petty officers?
well, the petty officers, of course, were the grades, the enlisted grades E4 and above. And there weren't any of those in boot camp, though we had some recruit petty officers. And I was one of those. And they were the hierarchy of the boot camp command structure. We had our, who was actually a chief petty officer.
Would you like a bottle of water?
Oh, no, I'm fine,
Okay.
thank you.
Jim.
And he was our company commander. He was an E7. I've forgotten what. He may have been an engineman. I actually can't remember what his training was in the Navy, but he was an E7 chief petty officer. And the rest of us were just E1 recruits. But during boot camp, we were assigned different recruit petty officers, and I was in E5, and I've forgotten what that position was in boot camp, but we had those boot camp petty officers, and then of course when we got out of boot camp and people got ranked, then the E4 through I guess E9 was the highest enlisted rankings, and those.
What about your drill instructors? How were they?
Like drill instructors?
Yeah.
Well, we really just had this one, and he was our company commander. And the rest of who taught us were just people who were instructors, and they didn't act like drill instructors. Now our trying to remember what we called him, but our commanding officer there was he acted like a drill instructor, but the rest of them didn't really. They were just, most of them probably were petty officers. I don't recall that we had any commissioned officers. There were commissioned officers there in the boot camp, but they were in the command structure. They weren't teaching boot camp people there training. We saw them, but and I'm not sure exactly what they did, but that was the actual enlisted. I mean the actual commissioned officers. Not too many of them. There were a few, but
Yeah. Boot camp lasted how long?
I think it was 11 or 12 weeks. We started basically about the 12th of April, and I think it was about the 29th of June when we were done.
Did you go out on ships during boot camp?
I think I had 2 weeks of leave, and I reported aboard the Harry Hubbard on July the 14th, 1966. So it looks like I was off from boot camp for about 2 weeks, and I did come home to Tucson.
And that was the USS Harry Hubbard?
Yes, it was officially Harry E. Hubbard, middle initial E, and the hull numbers were DD 748.
What kind of ship is the Hubbard?
It was a destroyer, and it was commissioned in December of 1944 and saw action in World War II. And I believe it was the battle for Guam. And I'd have to look in the history books, but it was involved until the end of the war,
Yeah.
and was decommissioned a time or two. But then recommissioned and was in commission entirely during the Vietnam War. Well, up until October of '66, that portion of the Vietnam War.
Yeah. Okay. You were assigned to what division?
It was on the ship. It was M division.
Or what is M division?
Well, I'm pretty sure it was machinist mates. I never asked them what M stood for, but M division was all the machinist mates from the forward and after engine room.
What were your duties on the ship?
Our duties as a machinist mate, and of course, what rank you had defined which of those duties you had, but we operated and repaired the main steam plant on that ship. So it was, when the ship was underway, we were down there in that engine room operating the ship. And we answered bells from the bridge. When the bridge had a bell that said ahead 1/3, they had a lever that they ran forward and it gave a bell down the engine room, and then they dialed in the shaft RPM. And that RPM dialed in for us too. And we had a big throttle valve that was probably 3 feet in diameter. And it opened the main steam valve to the steam turbines. And when we'd get a bell, it was a different speed we were going, and we would either open or close that valve, and we'd match the shaft RPM. We had a tachometer there on our throttle board, and we'd look at that tachometer, and it was telling us how fast the shaft that turned the screw at the back of the ship. It's a propeller, but in Navy terms, that was a screw. And that was our machinist mate had a screw on his crow. That was it. That's this little device right here.
Oh yeah.
And that's what pushed the ship through the water. And they told us the RPM they wanted, and we opened the throttle, opened or closed the throttle until we matched the RPM of that screw with the bell that they called for. And if that bell was heading from Southern California to Pearl Harbor, we may not get another bell for 2 weeks.
Where'd you go aboard the Hubbard? Where did you go aboard the Hubbard?
It was in Long Beach,
Long Beach.
and it was actually in the shipyards. It was in dry dock. So when I first saw it, it was sitting way up on huge timbers, and you had to walk down into this dry dock across gangways. It might have been 150 feet down to the bottom of that dry dock when you walked across this gangway, and the ship was way up on these. I've forgotten all the stuff they stacked up to let a ship sit down on, but it was in dry docks doing repairs. It had just come back from Vietnam. It made 3 cruises altogether, and it had made a cruise in 1965. It just, I think, returned in December, and I came on board in July, and it was going through being rebuilt in the shipyards. But they're in Long Beach.
Now you went aboard the Hubbard in July 14th, 1966. 66 or 68?
66.
Now when did you join the Navy?
April 12th, 1966.
66. Okay. I had written 68. I'm sorry. Okay. Where were your quarters on the Hubbard?
Well, all of us who were machinist mates, our living quarters were the
Can you show me on there?
were the port side fantail. So the port side is the right side of the ship. My rack, that in Navy terms, that's your bed.
Yeah.
It's a piece of pipe with a piece of canvas stretched between it, and they call it a rack. It has a little mattress about that thick stuck in a sheet that was called a fart sack. And that went on top of that rack, and it was right here just after this Mount 53, which is that 5-inch gun on the rear. We're one level below the main deck on the port side, and this area is called, from here back, it's called the fantail. And so we were just below the fantail. And the B division, which were all the guys in the boiler rooms, had the same area, only they were on the starboard. No, I'm sorry. It's been so long. I even told you wrong. I'm pretty sure the port side is the left side and the starboard is the right side. So I quit using those terms when I got out of the Navy. But so we were on the starboard side.
Yeah. What was your average day on the ship?
Let me give you two answers for that,
Okay.
because we had two scenarios, and that would be, is the ship out at sea or is it in port? If we were in port, usually what we were doing was working on the ship, making repairs, and once we got back in Long Beach, I always had an apartment away from the ship and away from the base, so we had to report. I believe it was 8 a.m. in the morning, and we'd get they'd ring some bells and announce over the intercom, all hands to quarters for muster and inspection. And every division on the ship had a certain place. And right back there on the fantail was where M division came for muster, and you'd come there, be inspected in your dress uniform, and then they'd maybe give you some anything that needed to be announced would be announced at that time, and mainly count heads, and then you were released to go to work. And if we were in port, we just went down to the engine room, and we had pumps. Some of these pumps were powered by electric motors, some by steam turbines. We had all this steam piping. We had big reduction gears. We had the big main steam turbines that tied into the reduction gears that powered the shafts. And it was in an entire steam plant, but for the boilers, was in the engine room. And we had to maintain that equipment and learn how to, pumps had packing that kept them from leaking. So you had a packing gland and rings of packing. You'd cut this packing and fit into the pumps and tighten it down and make sure that the pumps didn't leak, and you'd rebuild valves and tear down equipment, and the valve might just be a function as a valve. It either opens or closes, or it might be a control valve, which is part of an engineering system that senses either pressure or flow somewhere else, and it automatically modulates so that it'll keep either a pressure at a constant rate or a flow rate constant. So we had control valves and we had stop valves, and all those valves require maintenance. They had seats, and if the valve leaked through, we'd have to tear it apart and refinish the seat so that it wouldn't leak anymore. And those valves had stems that came out of the top that went to the wheels that you turned, and those had packing with little packing rings just like the pumps, and we'd have to pack those valve stems and make sure they didn't leak. So it was essentially steam plant equipment, just like a power plant would have, or another ship, or any place you have a steam plant. It's very similar equipment. That's what we had, and our job was maintaining that equipment and repairing it if we were in port. And the other scenario would be that we were out at sea. And if we were out at sea, that meant we were operating that equipment. Time to maintain it was before. Now we're operating it, and we're answering those bells from the bridge, and watching that equipment. We've got pressure gauges to watch the steam pressure, the steam temperature. We've got lube oil pumps that lubricate all those main reduction gears carried 26,000 horsepower, and they were bigger than this room. And the Navy didn't even own them; they leased them from Westinghouse, and they had pumps down there that just pumped lube oil that went all through those reduction gears to lubricate those gears. And then we had all kinds of water pumps, condensate pumps, and booster pumps, and main feed pumps. Our main feed pumps boost. I've forgotten how many stages they were. They were six or eight stage centrifugal pump that took water from a pressure of barely above atmospheric pressure and pumped it up to 750 psi. And that was enough pressure that was greater than the 600 psi boiler pressure that's boiler operated with. So when they got low water and they opened their valve, we had more pressure than that boiler, and that feed water would overcome the water and flow into it. And so when we got that, we received it from steam to them, went through the engines, expanded, turned our screws, and then went into a main condenser. And we had seawater flowing through tubes, cooling that steam when it was all expanded, and it was actually at almost a perfect vacuum. It was at about a negative 14 psi gauge, or less than 1 psi absolute pressure in that condenser, and there, that's where it condensed back to water, and our condensate pumps would pick that water up and pump it up to our deaerating feed tank, and from there it went to our booster pumps. Booster pumps fed the suction side of those main feed pumps, and then from there it went to that 750 psi back to the water.
How'd you make fresh water for the pumps?
Well, we had, they were, I'm trying to name the actual evaporator, but it was a double system. We evaporated the seawater twice. Didn't get it pure enough the first time, and it was all done in a single shell. So in a cylindrical pressure vessel, we had this evaporator, and we brought in seawater, and we boiled that seawater until it made steam. And that's a common process. It's done with hydrocarbons in a refinery. That's where we get our naphtha and our different weights hydrocarbons. All the way at the bottom of one of those towers is your heavy stuff. But it's real simple. When your liquid is water, it boils it, if it's atmospheric pressure, at 212. And those evaporators boiled it, and then they brought in cool water to cool it and recondense it. And then that water was collected over in the second shell, and it was boiled again and recondensed again. Mm-hmm. And the water that we collected from that evaporator had a device that measured the salinity. In other words, how much salt is in this water. And we had a criteria, and it was 0.065 parts per million. In other words, if we had 1 part of sodium per part of water, that was way too much. 1 part in a million. Mm-hmm. We had 0.065, 60 thousandths of 1 part in 1 million of sodium. So this water was as pure a water from salts as you've ever seen that came out of these evaporators. And that went to our feed water. There were 2 places that water could go, either to feed water or to drinking water. And if it got above 0.65, we switched the valve over to drinking water. and ideally, if those evaporators were working correctly, they were considerably less than 0.65 all the time. And we just kept our feed water tanks topped off, and if they were topped off, then we went to drinking water. Not because we had salty water, but because we had topped off feed water.
Now, what'd you do with the salt after you evaporated the water?
Oh, it just pumped out as water a lot saltier than seawater. It just went right back in the sea.
Okay. What watches did you stand?
Well, the very first watch I stood when I got out of boot camp and the ship got underway was called messenger watch. And it's somebody striking for machinist mate. That's the first thing you learn. And it's the first kind of watch you're assigned, and it's walking all through that engine room with a clipboard, kind of like the one you've got there, and you've got a one single sheet of paper on it, 8.5 by 11 sheet, and it has probably 50 places on it that you either do a check mark or you write down a temperature or a pressure, and you walk around that entire engine room, and somebody shows you every pressure gauge, every temperature gauge, and everything that you're observing, and every hour you walk around and get all those readings, and then you take that clipboard to your top watch, and he's the one who's in charge of everything that happens while that engine room is lit off and the ship's underway, and he's keeping his eye on everything. He doesn't have time to walk around that engine room looking at pressures and temperatures. So this guy's doing it for him, this messenger watch. And then he hands him that sheet of paper, and what took this other guy maybe 30 or 40 minutes to collect, he can look over in a couple minutes. And he can see that every one of those pressures and temperatures and other observations on that piece of paper are what they should be. And then the messenger watch has the obligation to do that once an hour. Takes the better part of an hour, probably not the complete hour to get it done. And then the next hour he'll be doing it again. And our watches were for 4 hours when we were underway, and then if you were on normal watch detail, you had 8 hours off and then you came back on watch. So when you were underway, you either had the 12 to 4s watches, which were called the mid watches. That means at 12 noon you went on watch and you got off at 4 o'clock, and at 12 midnight you went on watch, and at 4 in the morning you got off. And then the next watch section was the 4 to 8s. And then the next watch section was the 8 to 12s. So you stood 4 on, 8 off. But if your 8 off were working hours between 8 in the morning and 4 in the evening, you didn't get off watch, you just went down to work. So if you're thinking about it already, if you got the 4 to 8 watches, you really got screwed, because you got to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go on watch. And when you got off watch, it was just in time to go to work. And you went to work at 8, and when you got off work at 4 that evening, it was just in time to go back on watch. And you worked and you watched all in the same place. So the week that you had the 4 to 8, you were doing 16 hours a day in the engine room. Just basic. Then if you had a refueling detail, it was called a special sea and anchor detail if you were heading into port, getting out of port, and those lasted for hours sometimes.
Now, what's refueling?
The ship didn't have enough fuel on board to go more than I can't remember. I think we could go all the way from the coast of California to Pearl Harbor without refueling. But when we were out off Vietnam, we'd have to refuel.
How do you refuel at sea?
Well, there would be an oiler ship, a whole lot bigger than us, and it'd come in beside our ship, and they had one of us or the other had these kind of gun type things, and they'd fire these real small lines, like maybe with a bean bag or something over. And that was the first one, and then somebody would start pulling a little line and pull a little bit bigger one, and that little bit bigger one and pull a bigger one yet, and pretty soon you could hook it up to some power equipment and winch some stuff over. And pretty soon you had 12-inch diameter fuel hoses, and when those things hooked up, you could start taking on thousands of gallons of fuel pretty quickly. And when you actually flowed fuel, you had it all over there in probably an hour or two. But it took a long time to get it all hooked up and get flowing. And you're both steaming next to each other, probably doing 17 knots or something. Ships are a lot more stable when they're underway. And you want these two ships going the same speed and not doing different things. And when you're both hitting the same wind, going the same speed, you're just a lot more stable than you would be just sitting out there next to each other trying to stay in the same place. Okay. When you're underway, you can steer and you can stay the same distance apart. And you can keep the same speed. And it just works a lot better. So you refuel underway.
Now, when you went on board the Hubbard, where did the ship go when you first went on board?
Well, the very first place that we went, and it was many months later, was after the ship had seen all this repairs and refitting and rebuilding and whatnot. We went out to, and there's a name for that, but just a shakedown cruise. And so a bunch of us had just reported on. If we came out of boot camp, we'd never been on a ship before, so it was brand new for us. And we just went off the coast of California there, and we'd just a little ways out from Long Beach there was Catalina Island, and you go out beyond Catalina and just answer bells, and before too long there was a place you could fire those 5-inch guns on the side of a mountain there on Catalina Island, and you could shoot the guns, and it was just little shakedown cruises. You didn't stay out overnight. You just went out for a few hours, and it was several months before we went on one of those, and I can't remember how long or when it was, but before too long we had been on a bunch of those, and we learned those of us that just came on learned about operating the engine room, and each one of us had a place that we went for general quarters.
Where was your general quarters?
My general quarters was the engine room.
Okay.
We had a lot more people than it took to run the engine room, and some of the people went to gun mounts. Some of the machinist mates. Some of them were on repair crews, ones that would do repairs if the ship was damaged during general quarters. Learned how to stuff mattresses and blankets in holes in the ship and that sort of thing. But the best crew that they could put together to operate the engine room always went to the engine room for general quarters. And from the very first time that we got general quarters assignment, I think I was just an E2, and they had like a messenger watch, something to do for an E2, and I was always chosen on their best people that they could put on watch down in the engine room. I was always on that crew. When I started, it was as a messenger watch, and before, by 2 years later, it was. I can't remember for general quarters. Part of the time I was top watch, but we had a first class machinist mate down there, and I can't remember what he always did, but if he was down there, he would have been top watch.
Now, what is top watch?
Top watch is the guy in charge of everything.
Okay.
And it was usually at least a second class machinist mate, But usually a general quarters stopwatch would be a first class. But they put the best crew they had for running the engine room for general quarters, because that's where you, I mean, you might, in theory, you could have had torpedoes or other naval gunfire tearing that ship up, and you were having to make corrections and reconfigure that engine room, and you had ways of, sometimes if you had damage, you could get you could cross connect and get feed water from the other plant, and you had to know how to do those things to overcome damage that might have shut you down. Yeah. But you had ways that you could avoid some of that damage by having every pump down there you had two of. And if one pump got damaged, you just went to the other pump. Mm-hmm. And you had two of everything but for the main engines and reduction gears. Everything else there was two of.
What did you do off the coast of Vietnam?
It's always two categories. We either ran plane guard for our carriers, and they were so valuable. Our ship was a pawn to protect the carrier. And in Vietnam, a whole lot of the military action were naval fighter aircraft coming off those carriers, and those carriers needed to be protected. And there would probably be, I can't tell you the exact count or what was required, but very easily 4 to 6 carriers protecting 4 to 6 destroyers like I was on, protecting one carrier.
How do you protect the carrier?
Well, you're steaming. You might be a quarter mile off, maybe a half a mile off, and you're up in front, and you're back astern, and you're off on the sides. You surround that ship in every direction, and you're looking for any threat of any kind, be it a military threat, be it some kind of threat from the waters. Is there something in the water that could be damage to something floating that a ship could hit and damage? Is it a torpedo? Is it a small PT boat operated by somebody unfriendly? Is it anything whatsoever, man-made or natural, that could be a threat to that carrier? And the other thing is, we had naval flyers going down off those carriers. Not very many, but I saw one aircraft down. I know that we were on the scene picking up some of the pieces, and so those aircraft carriers can't go around and pick up pieces. They're too big and they got too many responsibilities and other things. And so when bad stuff happens, those ships they're plane guarding are doing there to perform all those functions that a ship of the responsibility and the size and valuable asset of the carrier just can't do.
If a torpedo is fired, what do you do?
If our captain could see it, he'd run in front of it. Our ship would take it, and our ship was a toothpick compared to a telephone pole. And the value of our ship was just practically nothing compared to that carrier.
Yeah.
So we would leap in front of that torpedo to take it before it got to that carrier.
What carrier were you with?
Well, I'm trying to remember, but the biggest one that we all knew about, because there was only one of them, and it was a ship that's been named over and over and over again, but it was the very first nuclear-powered carrier, and it was the Enterprise. We could see it from, if you could see it at all, it had a great big, huge, cubicle-looking box up on the superstructure. No carrier before or after it ever looked like that, and you could always spot it from a distance. And during Vietnam, it was the only nuclear-powered carrier, but it was off Vietnam, and we oftentimes operated with it.
Ever
And-
come under enemy fire?
Yes.
What happened?
Well, then I'm talking about enemy enemy fire, like large gunfire, like the Navy has. There was an island off off the coast of North Vietnam called Hon Mat, like HONMATT. I'm guessing at that spelling, but that's how it was pronounced, Hon Mat. And the North Vietnamese had to get their military supplies in, ammunition and other supplies. And over on the Cambodia side, the west side of Vietnam was the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And a lot of what our planes were doing was attacking that trail and whatnot. But on the west side of Vietnam was just the Gulf of Tonkin. And all these little junks would carry ammunition and military supplies. And if we were not doing plane guarding, we were doing naval gunfire support. One of the jobs we had was to sink those small boats carrying that ammunition or other military supplies. And that Hon Mat Island had a gun on it, bigger than the guns on our ship. We heard it was about a 9-inch, and it would protect those North Vietnamese boats hauling these military supplies, and try to keep the ships like the ship I was on away from it. Because when we saw those ships, we sunk them. A lot of times we were close enough to see them, or spotter planes, which would be like little Piper aircraft, maybe Beechcraft. Most of them I remember were Pipers. If they'd see them, we could hit a little ship like that from miles away, one shot. They'd call in if it was moving its speed and direction and where it was, and we'd blow it out of the water. But this big gun would protect those little boats in the area of that Hon Mat Island. So, and I don't know how many of the ships like ours would do it, but there was a couple of miles of coast between that island and the mainland, and we'd go in at flank speed as fast as our ship would go, just making it harder to hit us. And then we'd open fire on that gun. It was in a cave, and it would go back in that cave to protect it from other ships like ours. But when a ship came in there shooting at it, it'd come out and exchange fire. And so we would exchange fire with that gun, and we were hit by shrapnel from that gunfire, but never a direct hit. And that's considered, so we were hit by that gun, but just not enough to kill anybody or to damage the ship in a way that it wouldn't function properly. And I can't remember if that happened, if we received shrapnel more than once, but we, on many different occasions, went in and exchanged gunfire at Hon Mat Island. Now that was in the 67 cruise. And all of us who did that, and a bunch of the other guys over there in the Navy, I'm sure got great satisfaction when we read the Stars and Stripes newspaper at the beginning of our 68 cruise. And it had an article about Hon Mat Island and the battleship New Jersey, sister ship to the Iowa, that we discussed earlier. And we never could hit this gun. It never hit us, and I don't know that it ever hit any of the other ships, but I mean, other than what I described. But we had 5-inch guns, and the New Jersey had 16-inch guns. And what I had understood was the New Jersey 16-inch guns one round would excavate 50 feet deep, and I've forgotten how far around. But the New Jersey went in with the 16-inch guns and excavated that cave off the island. So until the place where that cave was below sea level, and I don't think it took that many rounds. And so the gun on Han Mai Island during 1968 cruise no longer existed. It was below sea level, and we all got a kick out of that.
Now these little boats, where were they taking this ammunition? These little boats.
Well, it was going to either the regular North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong,
Okay.
and unfortunately, the stuff that went on in that war over there, as a machinist mate, they didn't tell us anything. We were just down there answering bells. Now, if we wanted to find out something, we had to ask somebody who, like a gunner's mate. And these FTC guys, I think, that got some of these signals and had to do with the aiming systems on these guns, and got stuff from the spotter planes, and those guys knew what was going on because they had to do their jobs. All we had to do was understand that steam plant and answer those bells. And if we didn't need to do that, they didn't tell us anything.
How many tours did you make off Vietnam?
2.
Two. Were you there when the Pueblo was captured? That was in '68.
I was there from July of '68 to January of '69.
Do you remember the Pueblo?
I do, and I remember the incident. I remember how disappointed I was that for a while the North Koreans had some of our people. I can't actually remember where I was when that happened. If I knew the date, I could. If it was in '68, if it was in the latter half of '68, I was over off Vietnam. If it was early, between January and July, we were stateside in Long Beach.
January 23rd, 1968.
Yeah, I was in Long Beach.
Okay. Okay. Because I understand the Navy had to change all their top secret stuff because North Koreans had it from the Pueblo.
No, I'm sure they interrogated
Yes.
some of those people. In which case, I never had a security clearance, so I wouldn't have known that from experience.
Okay.
Because people in my position at that time had no reason to need a security.
After your 2 tours off Vietnam, what'd you do?
We got back in I think it was February of '69. I was actually separated October 22nd of '69. And it was 6 months prior to my 4 years being up. And there was a bill in Congress back in the election of '68. Nixon got elected, and he campaigned on slowing that war down. And he got a bill through that was called Reduction in Authorized Strength. And that bill said if your ship was decommissioned and you had 6 months or less to do, they just separated you. And I had about 5 months and 2 weeks, and it just got me under the wire and I got out.
So you were discharged October '69?
October 22nd. I'm not sure discharge was I was separated.
Okay.
Wasn't discharged till 2 years later.
Oh yeah, you had 6 years.
Yeah, until my 6 years was up.
Yeah.
It was actually 2.5 years later.
What'd you do after you got your discharge?
Well, my discharge didn't mean anything to me. I just meant I was out. I didn't choose to be involved with the reserves. There was a Navy Reserve place in Stillwater where I went when I got out, and then I went and talked to them. And they would have liked for me to have. They needed a second class machinist mate, but I turned them down. I had to get away from it.
Okay. So when did you come to Oshaleta?
1995.
Why'd you come here?
I had been working at the Research Center for Halliburton Services in Duncan.
Okay.
And they had in April of 1994, they had a major layoff there. There were almost 500 professional people, engineers and chemists were laid off in April. So I was laid off looking for a job, and I found one with an engineering contracting company here in Bartlesville named Service and Technology Corporation. Mm-hmm. And I interviewed with them and was offered a job, and just looked around and found a home. Here it's not really in Oshaleta, it just has an Oshaleta mailing address. It's a mile, the little town of Oshaleta with couple of hundred people is a mile and a half away.
Yes.
And a mile and a half's a long ways in this little town. So,
Should we have been in Vietnam?
man, that's a tough question, but I can tell you today why I was there. And I was there to fight the advance of communism. And if I could help somewhere do it again, I'd go back again to do the same thing. That's why I was there. Other people may have been there for a different reason. I was there for that reason, and I should have been there for that reason. Should the government have been there? Probably for the same reason, but I don't make those kind of decisions.
Yes. Would you join the Navy again?
Yeah.
I'd like to do a word association. I'll give you some words that you give me your reaction. The first one is boot camp.
It sucked.
USS Hubbard.
It was mine.
Ho Chi Minh.
Well, Vietnam. He inspired the other side.
Vietnam.
Vietnam's I'm going to call that, what, was it a word? Was that what we were looking for? If it was a word, it'd be Vietnam.
Yeah. Lyndon Johnson.
Let me back up and make sure I've got what. Are you asking for a word or just a thought or
A thought, whatever. Not a single
okay,
word.
all right.
Just,
Then because it took more than one word.
yes.
I guess for Lyndon Johnson, and I may not have said it at the time, but what I would say now was not so fast. Don't build up the war so fast. Let's take it at a little slower pace until we find out what we're really doing there and why, and if we should be there.
Richard Nixon.
Thank you. Thanks for getting me out of that. 6 months early.
Anything else you want to talk about? Oh, tell me about the guns on the Hubbard. You mentioned the computerized guns on that.
Did you want me to describe those?
Yes, yes.
Okay, well, I saw this when I was in the Navy, and it was the most, as an 18-year-old, it was just the neatest thing I'd ever seen. Said, how could man come up and design something that could do that? And what it was the aiming system on those ships, and they were World War II ships, and it was computerized. And I didn't realize at the time. I thought at the time that these had been upgraded, but they were not digital computers. They were analog computers, and we actually had them during World War II. Mm-hmm. And the ship had a gyroscope that could keep track on an absolute reference to direction, and it had accelerometers so that it knew if that ship pitched or rolled, and it was in an engineering feedback system and sent all those actions that the ship took relative to that accelerometer. It sent to the control system, and all the hydraulics that aimed those guns were tied into that computer, and they, as fast as those signals could be transmitted, those guns were aimed, and when the ship was at sea pitching and rolling in rather heavy seas that you might have to hang on to something, those guns were aimed and held on their target, and I swear you could have set a coffee cup on the barrel and it wouldn't even have spilled. And I've never seen anything so amazing or unbelievable that a gun could have all that power of equipment operating so fast that as fast as a wave could pitch the ship, that the ship could just as quickly counteract so quickly that it wouldn't even shake the liquid in a coffee cup. Mm-hmm. And now, I didn't actually see a coffee cup, but they looked like they were just dead still in heavy seas. It just was unbelievable. Mm-hmm. That's how those guns operated, and I know they had hit a military truck from 8 or 10 miles away with one shot. Handheld rifles aren't that accurate, and I'm a gun enthusiast, and I like to target shoot, so
Yes.
I know that.
Well, sir, this is an excellent interview.
Well, I'm glad. I like to share it if I can.
I want to thank you for your service and thank you for the interview.
Oh, well, you're welcome.
And again, this is March 11th, 2021. My name is Joe Todd. This has been an interview with James Stromberg in Oshaleta, Oklahoma. Thank you.
All right, thank you.